One of the oldest and most unsettling questions a human being can ask is this: what if the world we take for granted is not the whole story? And what if the strange hunger we carry inside us, the feeling that something is missing, something veiled, something almost remembered, is not confusion at all, but the echo of a forgotten truth? In the early centuries of the Christian era, during a time of intense intellectual exchange and spiritual experimentation, Gnosticism emerged as a religious and philosophical current shaped by influences from Judaism, early Christianity, Neoplatonism, and the mystery traditions of the East. Yet, unlike systems rooted mainly in obedience or inherited belief, Gnosticism placed its center of gravity elsewhere. It was concerned with gnosis, a form of inner knowing that did not simply inform the mind, but awakened the soul to its true origin. At the heart of this hidden cosmology stood the Aeons, divine emanations that express the attributes of the Supreme Source, the invisible monarch, the One, the reality beyond name, beyond form, beyond all ordinary comprehension. This supreme God, in perfect purity and fullness, was not imagined as a distant ruler who crafted the universe by direct command. Rather, this source was understood as transcendent, with divine principles flowing outward through emanation, each aeon arising as a living expression of its inexhaustible perfection. Together these eons formed the pleroma, the fullness, not a place in the physical sense, but a state of total harmony, a luminous order in which truth, love, wisdom, grace, and all divine qualities existed in balance. These were not gods in the mythic sense of capricious personalities battling for power. They were more subtle than that, more abstract, and in some ways more intimate. Each aeon represented a principle of divine reality, a living aspect of the infinite, and together they reflected the totality of what the human spirit senses but cannot fully grasp when it longs for something pure, coherent, and whole. Among all these aeons, one figure stands at the center of the Gnostic drama, Sophia, whose name means wisdom. Her story is not only one of the most powerful in Gnostic thought, but one of the most psychologically haunting, because it feels less like a distant myth than like an image of what happens inside a human life. According to Gnostic narratives, Sophia, driven by a deep desire to know and to reach toward the invisible monarch, moved beyond the harmonious order of the pleroma. In that movement, something fractured. Her longing, however noble, crossed a boundary, and from that disturbance emerged Yaldabaoth, the demiurge, a flawed being born in ignorance of his true origin. Arrogant, isolated, and cut off from the fullness above him, he proclaimed himself the only God and began shaping the material universe, a world marked not by perfect harmony but by limitation, disorder, suffering, and forgetfulness. In this vision, the material cosmos is not evil in a simplistic sense, but distorted, a realm woven through with confusion, a place where souls can become trapped in ignorance, mistaking the prison for reality. Sophia, overwhelmed by the consequences of her act, falls into exile, yet her story does not end in ruin. She is not abandoned. The other eons move to restore balance, and Christ, understood here not primarily as a historical figure, but as a divine eon of redemptive light, enters the drama to bring gnosis to humanity, to awaken what has been buried, and to guide souls back toward the fullness from which they came. That is why Sophia's story endures. It is not merely a cosmic legend. It is an allegory of the human condition, the hunger to understand, the danger of separation, the pain of error, the loneliness of exile, and the quiet but persistent possibility of return. In discussions of Gnosticism, much attention is often given to the archons, the dark powers associated with the material realm, the forces that sustain ignorance, confusion, and spiritual sleep. Far less attention is given to the Aeons themselves, even though they form the true architecture of Gnostic cosmology, the luminous structure behind the fractured world, the bridge between the eternal and the manifest. The Aeons are not marginal ornaments in this system, they are its inner order. They embody the principles that uphold spiritual reality and orient the soul toward remembrance and redemption. Unlike the Archons, who belong to the lower drama of entrapment and deception, the Aeons remain in harmony with the invisible monarch, arising not through force or intention in the human sense, but through the overflowing abundance of divine perfection. Each one reveals something about the nature of ultimate reality. Bethos, often called depth, is the first and most ineffable, symbolizing the unfathomable infinitude of the source, pure potential without limit or boundary. From that depth emerges Barbello, the first active emanation, often associated with receptivity, wisdom, and divine maternity, the womb of sacred becoming, the vessel through which intention and manifestation begin to relate. As the hierarchy unfolds, nous, or mind, appears as the principle of divine self-awareness, the contemplative intelligence through which the source knows itself. From nous comes logos, the word, the ordering power that gives form to what would otherwise remain abstract, the bridge through which inner meaning takes form. And then we return briefly to Sophia, whose presence completes this structure, the Aeon of wisdom, the force through which the longing to know becomes both perilous and transformative. Christ, in contrast, represents the answering movement, the descent of redemptive light, the principle that restores orientation when consciousness has become lost in fragmentation. If Sophia is the wound of separation, Christ is the memory of wholeness. If Sophia is the search, Christ is the path home. Beyond these central figures, the pleroma also contains lesser aeons, arranged in complementary pairs, principles such as truth and grace, life and wisdom, prophecy and knowledge, each one contributing to the inner coherence of divine fullness. These pairings matter because they reveal that spiritual reality is not flat or singular, but relational, balanced, and intricate. The Gnostic universe is not a crude opposition between good and evil alone. It is a carefully structured field of meaning, where each emanation plays a role in the harmony of the whole. This contrast between Aeons and Archons forms one of the central dynamics of Gnosticism. The Archons are associated with deception, fear, oppression, and the maintenance of ignorance. The Aeons, by contrast, represent truth, light, fullness, and the possibility of remembering one's origin. Yet the Aeons are not important only as cosmic beings. They can also be understood psychologically and spiritually as inner archetypes that mirror the human struggle to reconcile clarity and confusion, intuition and intellect, meaning and chaos. Logos, for example, can be read as the capacity within us to bring order to inner disorder, to name what is real, to articulate truth amid the noise. Sophia can be seen as the impulse to seek deeper knowledge, even when that search leads through uncertainty, pain, and disillusionment. Read this way, Gnosticism stops being a remote religious system and becomes a map of inner experience. The tension between Aeons and Archons begins to resemble the tension many people live with every day. The pull between awakening and distraction, between depth and numbness, between what is most essential in us and the forces that keep scattering our attention. In the modern world, this ancient symbolism becomes strangely immediate. Alienation, systems of control, emotional exhaustion, identity confusion, the craving for meaning in a culture built on distraction. These are not abstract issues, they shape daily life. The Archons, reinterpreted through a contemporary lens, can be understood not only as mythic powers but as patterns, structures, and internal habits that keep human beings cut off from themselves. They appear in the loops of self-doubt that tighten without warning, in the intrusive thoughts that make you question your worth, in the constant comparison that turns another person's image into your private wound, in the envy that rises when you do not even want what you are chasing, only the feeling of being enough. They appear in shame, in fear, in dependence, in the restless craving for validation, in the urge to consume, scroll, perform, react, and keep moving, so that silence never has a chance to reveal what hurts. In this sense, the Archons are not only outside us in social systems, they are also inside experience itself, as distortions of perception and feeling. The modern world gives this dynamic countless channels through which to operate. Technology, social media, and economic systems often promise connection and freedom, yet they frequently deepen dependency and distraction. The attention economy does not simply occupy time, it fragments consciousness, pulling focus toward triviality while leaving the deeper hunger untouched. Human interaction becomes commodified. Belonging becomes measurable. Identity becomes a performance. People grow increasingly connected at the surface while becoming more estranged from themselves at a deeper level. This condition has been described in different ways by modern thinkers, but the Gnostic image captures something stark about it. A person can live inside a vast invisible prison while believing they are merely participating in ordinary life. The walls are not always visible because they are made of habits, impulses, narratives, compulsions, and inherited assumptions. And the prison is not only social, it is temporal, emotional, perceptual. It is the prison of being perpetually thrown outward, always reacting, always chasing, always becoming, never arriving, never resting long enough to ask who is doing the chasing and why. Against this, the Aeons can be reimagined as living principles of restoration. Wisdom, clarity, contemplation, receptivity, truth, inner order. These are not decorative ideals. They are forces of realignment. They point toward practices and states of being that recover the bond between the material and the spiritual. Mindfulness, contemplative stillness, self-observation, reflection, silence, reconnection with nature, and the slow rebuilding of a life that is not ruled by compulsive distraction. Seen this way, Gnostic thought becomes more than metaphysics. It becomes a tool for self-awareness and resistance, a way of recognizing the dynamics that pull consciousness away from its own center. This is why the old symbols still speak. They are not only about another world, they illuminate this one. They reveal how easily human beings become separated from what is most alive in them, and how possible it still is to remember. In that sense, Gnostic knowledge also has a social edge. Wherever systems perpetuate ignorance, manipulation, and passivity, the movement toward awareness becomes a form of resistance. Currents in philosophy, sociology, and critical thought that question established structures can be seen, in a symbolic way, as participating in this same movement, refusing easy narratives and exposing the forces that diminish human freedom. Gnosticism, then, is not simply a relic of esoteric religion. It is also a language for personal empowerment and cultural awakening. And yet its deepest message remains intimate. It says that within the human being there is a divine spark, a buried luminosity that does not belong to the machinery of fear, status, appetite, or control. That spark is easy to forget, especially in a world that teaches people to define themselves by productivity, by approval, by roles they perform, by political identities they inherit, by endless cycles of wanting and proving. But forgetting is not the end of the story. Gnosis is the act of remembering. It is not accumulation, it is recognition. It is the moment you begin to notice your thoughts rather than drown inside them, the moment you observe a craving without obeying it, The moment you feel shame, arise and refuse to build your identity around it. The moment you realize that not every emotion tells the truth, not every desire deserves allegiance, not every voice in the mind is the voice of your deepest self. Through conscious observation, through inward honesty, through the reclaiming of attention and life force from what drains it, something begins to shift. Energy returns, presence returns, meaning returns. And because human beings are not isolated in the deepest sense, this movement of awakening never belongs to one person alone. Every act of remembrance changes the field around it, however subtly. Every individual who begins living from what is more real, more loving, more lucid, makes it slightly easier for others to do the same. A quiet awakening in one life can ripple outward into family, friendship, community, and culture, not through force, but through resonance. This is how spiritual insight becomes lived reality. It stops being an idea and becomes a way of inhabiting the day. To live from your true nature does not mean withdrawing from the world or pretending suffering is unreal. It means moving through ordinary life without surrendering your center to fear, envy, shame, craving, noise, or the endless pressure to become someone else. It means speaking from what is clear rather than from what is wounded, choosing presence over compulsion, depth over spectacle, remembrance over performance. In a distracted age, that alone is radical. And perhaps that is why these ancient images endure, not because they demand belief, but because they offer a language for something many people already feel, that beneath the confusion, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the performed identities and inherited narratives, there remains a deeper self waiting to be remembered, and a more luminous way of being that has never completely disappeared. To me, that is what makes this vision so powerful. Whether one sees it as spiritual symbolism, inner psychology, or sacred myth, it speaks to a truth many people already feel but rarely know how to name. That something inside us is greater than the forces that try to reduce us. If you have stayed with this journey, then in some quiet way, you have already shared in that act of remembrance. I would really love to know how this felt to you, what part stayed with you most, and what your own thoughts or interpretation of this Gnostic vision might be. If this reflection resonated with you, you can gently support the video with a like and subscribe so we can continue exploring more hidden and meaningful ideas together. Thank you for watching, for being here, and for your support.